podcast is brought to you by SUMA, the voice of Saskatchewan's urban municipalities. SUMA is proud to represent the urban communities that over 80% of Saskatchewan residents call home. Municast discusses issues related to local governance and municipal leadership, like best practices, education, reconciliation, resources, and more. In Season 8, we're focusing on SUMA's key advocacy initiatives. This episode explores the value of libraries, the challenges they're facing, and ideas for how to address those challenges.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sean McKenzie, and I have the pleasure to serve as the Director of Advocacy Services for SUMA. Our podcast today is about libraries, something that's very near and dear to my own heart. When I was little, my grandmother would take my sister and I to the Connaught Library in Regina for all sorts of things, from puppet shows to story time or sing-alongs, and of course to find books. When I got a bit older, I would trek from my own childhood home to the Prince of Wales Library branch, the old one, not the new one, on foot at least weekly to exchange everything. Neither of those libraries were bigger than a post-World War II bungalow, and I don't think the old Prince of Wales branch could have been more than about 500 square feet. But they were entire worlds for me. Places to lose and find myself, to choose my own adventure, and to discover a lifetime love of reading. But it's been a while since the 1980s. Libraries, like everything else, continue to change and evolve, though they still exist as cornerstones in their communities. Today, I'm going to be chatting with 3 guests about how libraries are evolving, why they're still relevant, the challenges that they're encountering, and what can be done to address those challenges. Each and every one of our guests today has had a distinguished career or two, and I could likely spend most of our discussion time just listing their credentials and experience. I'm guessing, however, that isn't what most people are listening for, so I'll give a brief introduction for each. With us today, we have Jason Barnhardt, the Senior Director of Business and Economics with Praxis, with over 15 years of professional experience in program development, analytics, and asset management. We have Malcolm Eaton, a consultant, a former school principal, 3-term mayor of Humboldt, counselor for Humboldt, former VP of Cities for SUMA, and recipient of SUMA's Scoop Lurie Award. Both Jason and Malcolm were key players in a study that SUMA recently contracted Praxis to conduct into the provincial library system and to make recommendations on what they could see improved. My third guest is Jeff Barber. Jeff has been the library director and CEO of the Regina Public Library since 2005. He's also worked within the Southeast Regional Library in Weyburn, been head of access services in the University of Saskatchewan, and is a past president of the Saskatchewan Library Association, as well as past chair of the Canadian Urban Libraries Council. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
I think the best place to start might be the world has changed a great deal since the 1980s, when I was trekking to my local library branch. Ebooks, streaming videos, music, ubiquitous internet access, and Wi-Fi have all emerged since that time. So what function do libraries hold in today's society? And maybe we can start with Jeff on that one.
Sure. And, I think it's sometimes difficult to kind of imagine, but the way I see public libraries, I actually don't see public libraries have really fundamentally changed what they do at all. Public libraries are at their base, they are information-centered organizations, and they're connecting people with information. They're connecting people with each other because other people have information. So it's one of those things that the changes over time are very much, I would say, in how we do what we do. But the fundamentals of a public library as an information services organization, whether you are in a rural library in Saskatchewan and you walk in the door and you say, I want the new Stephen King novel, and someone helps you find that, or whether you're in the Central Library in downtown Regina and you don't have a place to stay tonight, while a different circumstance, it is fundamentally a reference question about how to connect a person with information that they need to get on with their lives or improve their lives or kind of engage in society in some way.
I love that. So we're talking about connecting people and connecting people with information. Great.
I agree with Jeff a lot on that, and I think that's a very basic explanation of the role that libraries have in communities. What I see and what I would add, from the perspective of smaller communities, the towns and villages around the province, is libraries fulfill all those same roles, but there's a whole bunch of other sort of things that come into play in terms of the roles that a library has in a community. I think rural libraries are very connected to the seniors community. I think they're very connected to school communities. I think they provide programs and services that smaller communities value and need. People aren't always able to access larger centers for those kind of programs and services and activities. I'd like to throw in a couple of interesting things that, in thinking in preparation for the podcast and thinking about this. I remember the community of Birch Hills just a few years ago received one of our Saskatchewan municipal awards. Basically, their seniors club had an old building that was just not functional, and the community and the seniors club decided they're not going to invest any money in that. But the town council of Birch Hills got involved with the seniors club as well as the local library, and they took a look at the empty co-op building and undertook this huge renovation of that building. And that is now where the library, a very modern, bright, well-connected digitally and all those kind of things, but it's also multi-use facility. There's a community hall there. The community hall serves the seniors club, but it also serves all other kinds of things in the community. So I find those kind of partnerships in the smaller communities out in villages and towns throughout to be really a fascinating way of them making their library very much part of the community. I think it's, if you're going to go to the community hall, you're going to be in the same building that the library is located. So I think those things are really important out there in small communities. I'm also reminded of Tisdale, where the high school and the community library are in the same building, and they're in the recreation center. So you go to a hockey game, or you go to curling, or you go to the community hall, and you're in the same building as the library. So I think, there's some differences out there in terms of the role of libraries, and I think some of those creative, innovative partnerships that go on really make the libraries very functional out in smaller communities, and I think that's a real challenge for lots of small communities.
And I'll say, yeah, Jeff, I agree with you. I think that's a very interesting take. In my experience, the way that I have interacted with libraries has changed considerably over the years. I access, and my family accesses ebooks, online videos. I'll take my young boys to the library, and there they've got puzzles, games. I hate to admit it, they do like the video games that some of the libraries got. They probably spend more time on it than they should. But it's more than just books. My memories of the library growing up were, you go to the library, you get a book, you take it out and you take it home. And that's just not the way that we interact with the library these days. And I think that's a fairly common experience for the general public. I also find that particularly in the big centers, libraries are a place for, they're almost always open. It's free access, it's a safe place to go. And, it's seen as more than just a place to go get a book. It's a community hub. And I think that has really changed, at least in my experience, over the last number of decades.
Yep. And yeah, very much the same experience. Ultimately, public libraries are increasingly over time, especially perhaps in an urban environment, one of the last places that anyone can go. You don't need to buy the book. You don't need to buy a coffee. You don't need to have a financial transaction on the spot. to be able to use that space, and it's there for community. I think, and Malcolm, your point about those partnerships, certainly as well in Regina and in Saskatoon, branches of the library in different places. We have one just actually not too far from here. We have one at a shopping center. We have one at Momoyatsan Center, which is a kind of a community center where the high school and the library and city community association and the daycare and various services for a community where the library is a part of that broad partnership, an unusual kind of partnership that really works for everyone.
Yeah, that's a great point. I never really thought about how much the library has become so much more of a communal piece than it felt when I was a kid. But I totally agree with you. I have a 14-year-old at home who quite regularly makes his way to the library and will meet a whole bunch of his friends there, and they'll play on the Nintendo Switch or PlayStation or whatever they've got up there, and even look at books together and goof around. So it's nice to see it become so much more of a community piece as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, you're goofing around reminds me of the stereotype, and certainly if you've been in a public library lately, there's none of that. No. There's goofing around, and ultimately that the public library as that community hub, as that place where people engage and connect, and especially of course as we've come through COVID and seen how important the library has been for people. The days of a quiet library, and we do get requests for, do you have a quiet space we can use? They're pretty rare.
Absolutely.
I'm reminded of the famous Albert Einstein quote. I'm pretty sure it was Albert Einstein who said, "The only thing you really need to know is where the library is."
Indeed.
Well, and that's kind of a great segue into. I want to talk a little bit about the two pieces of our library system in Saskatchewan. And we're very, very lucky here to have the one card system, where it doesn't really matter if there's a piece of library material that's only in the Prince Albert Library and I'm in Regina. I can easily get that brought down using my Regina library card because it's also my Saskatchewan library card. In order to facilitate that, we have kind of two tiers of libraries. We have our local libraries and we have our regional library system. I was wondering, Jason, do you maybe want to tackle an unpacking of what the difference is between those two?
Yeah, well, I will say, so Malcolm and I did some research on the Saskatchewan library system, and we also looked at the Alberta and Manitoba library systems. And what we found was the one card system was highly regarded across the country. It's very well integrated across the province. It's seamless from a public perspective. As you said, you can walk into any library and access any piece of material across the province. You can request it, and it'll come in. And in a lot of ways, it's efficient. It reduces the resources required. For the library to hold on to duplicate books, duplicate resources. There was a study done, or a survey in 2019, a general public survey that found the one card system was highly valued by the public over anything else. Clearly, it's a shining star for the province. I can say from my own personal experience, I take advantage of that quite often. Rarely do I not find a book that I'm looking for that isn't available somewhere around the province. That also gives residents, access to all the same information and resources that are available in the bigger cities. So I think that's a big advantage, and it's important for the province for that type of access.
Yeah, I appreciate that there's a real equality piece in there too, right? Anybody can get a library card and anybody can access materials from anywhere in the province. How have you seen that play out, Jeff, within, you've got the Regina library system. How do things work back and forth between that regional library system and the Regina library? Are they pretty smooth?
I would say so. I said, as Jason said, fundamentally quite seamless, and ultimately, depending on how you access our regular catalog. You may choose an item that you want. You may see that Regina has a copy. You might get it next week from Wawota because ultimately the system tries to meet the service need as quickly as it can. So if Regina's copy is out, it will send you the one from Wawota. So it is seamless, and we were able to accomplish that because 17 years ago, all the public libraries in the province, all the public library systems got together and said, we had different technology at different ages, but fundamentally all coming to end of life. Why don't we buy a single system together and have the whole province on one computer system? So we did that. And that makes all of this seamless. And ultimately adding on to that later, it's a little bit less seamless, but ultimately, yes, with digital materials as well. So we do, as a consortium, a provincial consortium, purchase digital materials, so ebooks and audiobooks, magazines, and so that material is also available anywhere in the province. And certainly, Malcolm could download some things right now if he wanted to from any of the libraries in the province.
Yeah, I find it's really good to hear the kind of cooperative work that's gone on between the regional system and the systems in the larger cities. I think that's really important, and I think the people of Saskatchewan really benefit from that. I really like, living in Regina. When I moved to Regina, I began to use the library a lot. I used the branch in the mall that you mentioned in the South Regina. I love it. Every time I go to the mall, I get to go to the library. And again, it's one of those really neat locations for a library to be. And I also like the way that I can go online and search for that book I'm looking for, get it ordered, kind of a hold system. I find the communication is very, very strong. I get notices right away when the book is in. It's very easy to go over and pick it up and so on. So things work very well. Is that process working in the other regions around the province, Jeff?
Yes, it is. For physical materials, it does look fundamentally the same to everyone in the province. Yeah. So there are some, and I think probably it'll come up later in the conversation. There are some stress points in the province around public library cooperation and some of the disparity in terms of regional systems and their funding and urban libraries and their funding, and that works quite differently. Mm-hmm. And has led, I think, over the years, it has led to some disparity between the cities and the rural systems. But fundamentally, for physical materials, although if you are, if you are in Weyburn, you may see Southeast Regional Library holdings first, but you can see the whole province, and you can select from the whole province. So that experience is fundamentally the same no matter where you are.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be a municipal podcast if we didn't talk about funding. So thank you for bringing that up. It does also occur to me, the comment you made earlier, Jason, around the value that people see in the one card system. And I recall the government trying to reduce the funding for the regional system here. I want to say it was 2017 because that was the darkest budget.
March 22nd, 2017.
Thank you, sir. It's amazing how many terrible things came out of that singular budget. Usually I can just point back to it and I'm right 90% of the time if it's something bad. But I recall the public outcry because the libraries immediately came back and said, if you're cutting that provincial funding, the one card system is out. We simply can't afford to do that without, at minimum, the level of funding that you're giving. And they haven't been terribly quick to increase that funding along with inflation. It stayed static for a very, very long time. So I thought maybe we'd unpack that a little bit. Who's paying for everything? And how is funding a challenge for the regional library system and the local library system?
Boy, that's a tall order. I'm going to start by I really appreciate your comment, Jeff, about the disparity that exists. That's arisen, and of course, the basis of that is sort of the issues with the funding model. I mean, the funding formula that is used for the regional system, I think that whole provincial budget piece, as you guys have mentioned, has been played with, but it basically there hasn't been any substantial increase or change to it since, I believe, 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And it's no wonder that there's been numerous resolutions at SUMA conventions, all pointing towards difficulties with funding. And those resolutions are coming from different places around the province, not just one location. And there's also been resolutions at the SARM conventions as well, trying to support the same thing. So there's no question that trying to have a sustainable, predictable funding for community libraries and the public library system is just become a really critical issue. And it certainly came up a lot in the work that Jason and I were doing, looking at the system around the province. There are some spots where I think part of the problem is there's a real diverse funding arrangements throughout the regions of the province. I can't speak for the larger cities, but certainly in the regions, there's a real variety of ways that libraries are funded and operate. There is certainly a lot of different levels of contribution from the municipalities to their libraries. There are contributions, of course, to the regional system from the municipalities, but that also varies. There are some rural municipalities that don't participate in that, for example. And there are other municipalities that are great partners to libraries. We found in some of our work, Jason and I, the RM of Rosthern, for example, provides tremendous support to both the community of Hague as well as the community of Rosthern for their libraries. And in addition to making a substantial contribution to their regional system, I believe it's the Wapiti system. But in the case of the small community of Hague, the RM of Rosthern looks at their total operating costs and gives them half of their operating costs every year. And they establish a bylaw every year which supports this. Actually, I think it's a multi-year bylaw approach. So hats off to the RM of Rosthern for the way they're reaching out and supporting libraries. Obviously, they have residents of the RM who look for those services in both Rosthern as well as Hague. But I just found that to be fascinating and a great example of a kind of contributions from the municipalities, not just the municipality that has the library building in it, but all of the members, citizens from the surrounding communities that value and want to support that library. So I think it's just great. And I'm sure there are other examples out there like that, but I also know there are examples out there where the contributions are limited or non-existent. So I think one of Saskatchewan's problems around funding is to figure out, and perhaps this is where some changes in legislation might help, in terms of the expectations of municipalities, but also of the residents of the municipalities in terms of how they support libraries in their communities. Jason, you spent a lot of time looking at the financial affairs. Maybe you'd like to add to that with some more knowledge than I have, please.
Yeah. So we did take a look at provincial funding since that 2017 budget. And the provincial funding largely goes toward operating funds. It's been virtually stagnant since then. Which has left the libraries to make up the difference in through municipal contributions and local contributions through donors and others. So it's been several years, and I think it speaks to how well the libraries have coped through that. Despite population increases and changing complexity of their offerings, still the provincial funding has remained the same as 2017 levels effectively. That stuck out to me in our research. Would be remiss to note that the regional system is a little different than the municipal system, and perhaps Jeff, I guess you could get into the municipal system and how it's funded.
Yeah, and ultimately, yeah, it is. And this is, as Malcolm said, this is part of that disparity, and the disparity partially comes from the structure of it, and ultimately, we're in a municipal library, so Regina, Saskatoon, and Prince Albert at the moment, and almost Lloydminster. We have our provincial grant is about 2.4% of our revenue. And in a regional library system, it's in the neighborhood of 40 to 45% of their revenue. So ultimately, in looking at, yes, and for Regina, we have a development office, we do fundraising, but we have some grants because we have a gallery, especially, and other program activities that attract grants. But fundamentally, we also then have legislation, and I would say an overall philosophy through history of public libraries provide services free of charge on the spot. So while the list of items we can charge for in a library is very short, something like, Malcolm, you lost your library card, I'm going to have to charge you for a replacement. It's that basic. And so the amount of money that libraries can bring in outside of that structure is very limited. But I think what that's really led to is that disparity. Ultimately, municipal libraries, the amount we receive from the province is historical. It has no link to anything other than history. So as population changes, as use changes, it's all irrelevant. So I think, and the reverse of that, I would say in regional libraries. So the southern half of the province is regional libraries. And ultimately, the catch, I would say, for them is that a great deal of the formula depends on population. So as different parts of the province, the population changes and is tending to go down, while regional libraries like Southeast, like Wheatland, that surround Saskatoon and Regina, the populations in the bedroom communities especially are going up. So with a predominantly population-based formula, that actually, I would say, is contributing over time to the disparity, even among the regional libraries, let alone the municipal libraries.
From the smallest villages to the largest cities, every day your urban municipality supports you. The water that travels from tap to sewer, the emergency services that keep you safe, the parks, libraries, and rinks that you enjoy, our cities, towns, villages, resort villages, and northern municipalities are urban hubs bringing people together. We are urban. Celebrate your municipality as part of the urban family.
Well, that's certainly something that we've heard loud and clear from some of the cities. They feel that the burden is increasingly falling on them, which does make sense as you see fewer people living within the rural context more and more. Than we're moving into cities, they take with that responsibility as well.
Yes, and some different expectations in terms of regions. And Malcolm was talking about a small library where, yes, legislatively RMs are expected to contribute to the libraries that their residents use. But the sentence stops there. So there's no direction, there's no remedy for an issue that might arise. But ultimately, the other difference is that municipality, again, let's say Wowota, where that book came from. So Wowota, that town is responsible for the library facility, for the building and maintaining it. In the city libraries, the Public Library Board is responsible for all of its facilities. So there is a bit of a different dynamic there too that I think contributes a bit to some of that disparity, but I think also contributes to a bit of the political tension and how it is a bit different between regions and municipal libraries.
Jeff, would you describe in the city of Regina that the library is part of sort of what I would call critical infrastructure for the city?
I would certainly say so, yes. And I think, as much as, it's one of those challenges in libraries because we saw 2017 come, March 22nd, we saw 2017 come. And a part of that conversation around, cutting funding, because for municipal libraries, 100% of our provincial grant was cut. And talking about, well, what is that? And where are those conversations around how on earth did that even happen? Part of that I think character in public libraries is a little bit that most of the time people love their public library and they're happy with the service they get and they think it's great. And really, until you threaten that, they don't get out of their reading chair and kind of come to act. And we saw that, I think, generally, we see high satisfaction rates. And when we survey users, the satisfaction rates actually are often so high that if you do that survey again in 2 years, you really can't show an appreciable difference that you can hang anything on about why did that change even happen. So we have that constant state of general public approval. But then, yes, when things come like a budget cut or things come like COVID, where there was nowhere you could go. And we, after that first round of closures, public libraries, certainly Saskatchewan and Regina in particular, encouraged the province to say, no, actually, public libraries can stay open. We are that only place where people can go. So yeah, critical infrastructure for a city, critical infrastructure where not knowing where to go, people know they can start there.
Yeah.
When we spoke to Lloydminster, they had recently moved their library branch for various reasons. And the new location they found was significantly increased visitors. Mm-hmm. So like the facility matters, the location matters, and that the cost of those facilities varies widely throughout the province. I know, Malcolm, you had told a story about Humboldt and whether they were in a heritage building or were looking at a heritage building, but maintaining facilities that, depending on the age and quality of the facility they're in, it varies considerably across the province, and that is the cost of that is borne by the municipality. So for the most part, that's an important distinction to make.
I think there's communities, and again, that goes to the resolutions that have come to the SUMA conventions. I think there's lots of communities out there. The library is in an old building that needs a lot of attention, or it's in the basement of the town office, and so on. And communities are struggling with various kinds of infrastructure, and libraries don't always appear on the radar in terms of priority areas, unless there is a voice in the community that helps move it forward. And I think this is something that communities, members who are public library supporters, have to speak up, as they did when the budget situation arose in the province. They certainly we heard their voice, and the government heard their voice, and changes were made. I think, public libraries have to be, they have to market themselves, and they have to let people know who they are and where they are and what they do. And there are probably lots of really good examples of that around the province, and some places where communities need to do a better job of that. But I think I view libraries as being a piece of the critical infrastructure in every community. And you can't shut the rink down for 2 months in the winter, and you can't shut you shouldn't be able to shut libraries down either. But a lot of communities, I think, are struggling with keeping those buildings and keeping those some of the programs and services going. Mm-hmm. And so they're looking for support. And I think the province is going to have to look at this. The resolutions coming to SUMA convention are calling for a major look at the funding formulas and the legislation. So,
well, I think, Malcolm, that's one of those challenges we frequently see with all municipal infrastructure. As I'm sure you'll know, we do have a tendency, because of how much we have to stretch municipal dollars, to let our facilities degrade to a point where it's catastrophic and we absolutely have to replace them. I think the challenges that libraries often fall into is that when you have all of that infrastructure coming up for renewal near or close to the same time, it's really hard to say, well, we need to do the library renewal when you also have the water treatment plant or the wastewater treatment plant or the landfill. And all of these are critical, but certainly if you're worried people are going to die without one of them, that's the one that tends to get dealt with first. And it's unfortunate, because I think as a society, we should be valuing libraries and associated things equally valuable and worthy of investment. But it is a challenge with so few municipal dollars on the table. I also just want to give a quick shout out. I don't think she's involved in municipal politics anymore, but I'm pretty sure Jackie Griffiths from Aberdeen is responsible for 3/4 of the resolutions that probably came through SUMA regarding libraries. So quick shout out to Jackie. We really appreciated all your hard work on this file. Let's talk a little bit about the future, where things are heading, where they need to head. What needs to change about our current system? And what could have the largest impact if we tackle it?
Yeah, in our report, we provided SUMA with 11 suggestions for advocacy, 2 of which were kind of our primary focus. And both of those have been suggested in the past. So they weren't new ideas. And we've already spoken about the funding formula and including an inflation factor, for instance, would be I think a significant improvement over what we've got. In 2023, the funding formula was brought from under the regulations, the provincial regulations, into a funding manual, which is a little bit more administrative. It provides a little bit more flexibility in the changes. So it was an incremental change that's positive. And I don't know if there's been any significant changes more recently with the funding formula. As of our study, there hadn't been. But that's one of the recommendations that we suggested for improvement, is to look at that funding formula, because it seems like a lot of the frustration coming out at the SUMA convention surrounded funding formulas, particularly in the regional library system. The second suggestion that we had was to update and modernize the legislation, which we've already mentioned here today. We're still working under the act that was brought in 1996, and it's had some minor updates, but the libraries have changed quite a bit since then. They're complex organizations. In some cases, they're quite big organizations, and so it takes a level of governance that it's different than what it was in 1996. So there's the legislation is fairly prescriptive in terms of the board structure and education requirements for library directors. And it's not a bad thing, but that probably could be looked at and improved and brought up to more modern standards, I think.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And just, food for thought, I find it's often helpful to give a bit of an example to go along with these things. 1996, most of us would have been watching our movies on VHS tapes.
Yeah.
How many of us still have VHS tapes in the house? That's when that legislation dates from. for the most part. I know from our perspective at SUMA, and usually from the government perspective, you get a piece of legislation that's 10 years old, it needs a pretty substantial relook. You hit that 20-year-old threshold, you're probably ripping the whole thing apart and blowing it up. We're going all the way back to 96 on this. So yeah, I would tend to agree with you. Would you say similar concern from the municipal library perspective, Jeff?
I would say, yeah. I would say interest certainly in looking at legislation, interested in reviewing it. I think for us, one of the things in legislation, and I think for both kind of my library and myself, we're not concerned about the minimum educational requirements for a library director. We're not concerned about municipal library boards needing to be larger. They don't need to be larger, I would say. I think that, yes, the legislation needs a review. I would say it's not urgent. I think one of the things that's a bit different about not only the Public Libraries Act, but the nature of the Public Libraries Act is that it is intended to be empowering legislation. So it is a legislative perspective that is trying not to tie you down. And as much as it came into force in 1996, or I think January 1st, 97, and yes, I was around then too. It is intended to essentially let libraries do whatever they need to do to serve their community, and instructs them to do that, understanding that public libraries are very much, they're very community-oriented things. So in spite of even Saskatoon and Regina being municipal libraries under the same legislation, we have some significant differences in how we do things because our communities are different in some ways. So I think, yes, the legislation needs some review. There's some things missing. There are some things that could be updated for passage of time. At the same time, I would say there is not much that public libraries have been stopped doing because of the library legislation. I can't think of anything really. So as much as 1996, you have VHS, I do have a V8. I have my kids' childhood videos in VHS. So I still have a few, but I think, but that passage of time has not kept us from offering digital services around the province, from upgrading technology, from providing that resource sharing requirement that the province funds in a way that keeps kind of growing to keep up with demand. We have implemented technology that is not even contemplated in the legislation. So I think, yes, its age does show. And yes, I would love to see an engagement of SUMA and SARM and the public library sector, these really significant stakeholders in public library services, get together and talk about what those things are, and wherever possible, have some agreement, be able to go to the minister with some agreement on what those pieces are that really need to be fixed. But I think because we are empowering legislation, that really isn't stopping us from anything. I don't think there's a particular rush for that.
Would you say then that the biggest holdback remains for you on the financial side?
Sorry, in terms of
just the challenges of doing everything that fulfilling all the library wants to do for its community. Certainly
to a degree, and I think as I mentioned, that disparity, and I think in between the municipal libraries and the regional libraries, I would say, and ultimately including the Northern Library System, Paxman Library System, in that disparity of funding, I think, has increased the pressure on the municipal libraries, the larger city libraries over time, to invest more in digital resources, invest more in physical resources. And so the cities become net givers to the rest of the province. And I think to a degree, yes, the ministry funds resource sharing in the province, and Regina, Saskatoon, Prince Albert, and Lloydminster contribute to that. And we receive provincial grant for that. But there is no real link between the provincial grant and how much it is and how much we do. So I think as that tension grows, I would say, as someone who's kind of been in the provincial public library system in Saskatchewan for so long, and I drank the Kool-Aid about how great it was years ago, but it concerns me that some of these tensions are going to start to create cracks.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, if you don't know the number offhand, that's fine. I'm surprising you with the question. But you mentioned about 2.4% of your operating funding comes from the provincial grant.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea how much of your operational costs go toward providing materials into the regional system?
It's it's actually a part of our project this year is for my finance group is to be doing some intentional work. We haven't actually done any work in that area since shortly before 2017. Ultimately, it is the nature of it makes it super complex, because if Jason requests an item that comes from Wawota, that's great, requires the region's resources, Wawota's resources, our resources. And when we send ours out, it requires resources on each side.
Yeah.
So I think part of the concern I have is, resource sharing, that balance of giving and taking is great. But concern that balance is getting kind of out of whack. One of the pieces of the resource sharing grant that you certainly would have come up across is there is a particular grant for specifically targeting public library services for Indigenous peoples, and that kind of came out of kind of, again, a historic challenge between a provincial piece of legislation and federal regulation and First Nations working in a bit of a different environment than just provincial government. So Regina Public Library gets just under $30,000 for that. We have had that exact same dollar amount. The very minor increases that Jason talked about before don't even apply to that sum. So in terms of, I can talk about in terms of that, the $30,000, what I can tell you is the cost of the Indigenous Services Coordinator that we hire is 3 times that, plus all of the programming and services that we have. So, and it's great. It's, in the end, of course, the Indigenous community is part of our community. So it doesn't need to be even Steven, but decades of no growth whatsoever. It is time to address that.
I think I might disagree with you a bit on. I think the regional systems are experiencing have a different experience than what the cities are experiencing. What we found was that they are having some trouble finding and keeping qualified administrators to move into some of the smaller, mid-sized urban cities, smaller urban cities in the province. That was a general theme that we picked up on throughout our studies. We also heard that the regional governance model, where there is a larger urban center amongst a broader regional grouping of communities and RMs, and trying to make that work in the board structure that exists. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of challenges there, and from what the mindset that we had when we started this research was some of the frustration that was coming out in the SUMA resolutions. Mm-hmm. And that was something we were asked to look at. And so I think that is a bit of a different experience than what the cities might be experiencing in that way. Mm-hmm. And Malcolm and I had done work a few years ago for SUMA on intermunicipal cooperation. And one of the key pieces of takeaways that we had from that was the dispute resolution process, for any sort of municipal shared service, be it park, arena, if there was a dispute in the region, the provincial process is probably not as robust as it could be. And that was one of the key takeaways that we had from Alberta. They have a very good system in place that seems to generate some progress in those conflicts, whereas we have seen quite a bit of frustration in that dispute process in Saskatchewan. So that was part of the research findings that we had in this report.
Yeah, it's I think an important thing because you have a community out there, a municipality that has a library, and it has nearby a couple of villages that don't have libraries. It has a couple of RMs surrounding the community, and the community's trying to get the RMs in the village, the citizens and the councils from the RMs in the village to support the community library because their residents are using the community library. And of course, the RM and the villages make the decision, yes or no. And there is no mechanism to take it to the next step. When you get no for an answer, there should be a mechanism other than some kind of user fee, which also, as you mentioned before, Jeff, there's only so many things people can charge for going into a library. And we certainly don't want to be charging the folks from the village down the road to come into our library. That's not the point. But it's that municipal cooperation, that regional municipal cooperation, like the example I gave of the RM of Rosthern. There needs to be mechanisms that support that, and one of the mechanisms is to have some kind of a dispute resolution process because you simply have a bit of a dispute there going on, and it's affecting the operations of the public library in that community, which serves more than that community. It serves a district or a region or an area outside of its own boundaries. So. And maybe the legislation we're talking about is maybe something in the municipal legislation more so than the public library legislation too. Anyways, the idea of having some kind of a dispute mechanism process, I think, is worth pursuing. I'd also like to mention that I really appreciated your comment, Jeff, about conversations, SUMA, SARM, and the library folks in this province. I think that's an excellent suggestion. And, if there was one thing I think that would come out of this whole process, the work Jason and I have done, the resolutions that have come to SUMA, the whole conversation we're having in this podcast, would be that there'd be continued discussions. And I think your suggestion is a really good one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I think, and ultimately, I ran into my board chair, and I ran into Jean-Marc and Randy about 6 weeks ago and started talking about that. So hopefully we'll be able to get something together for fall for an initial conversation. And I think in terms of, there absolutely are parts of the legislation that might need fixing. Yeah, dispute resolution is certainly not one that comes up very often in public libraries, but maybe because, yes, it's arduous. So yeah, I absolutely agree that there are parts that need to be addressed. I think I would put it a little bit in the qualification category, though, in that, that might be a really good conversation, but no one's had that conversation with our sector. So I think, in my mind, I would say jumping to eliminating a qualification misses the whole middle part where you actually analyze a problem and figure out what its dynamics are. I absolutely get that it's difficult to recruit and retain a professional librarian in a small city in Saskatchewan. I get that. And I was one for a decade. And because I had little kids, it was great, actually. A great place to raise little kids. But I get how hard that is. But I also want to say, but what's creating that dynamic? And I would say some of that is governance in a regional system is really kind of super difficult to manage, I would say. And having and yes, there's an executive committee that kind of mostly deals with operations in a region, but having a board of 100 or 150 people is a bit much. So, I know I don't know the details, but I know SUMA did some streamlining recently, and that's maybe a really good kind of thing to think about. And okay, so how can we streamline regional governance? Because it'll be difficult to get a person, and whether it's a professional librarian or anyone else, who really has the experience to deal with the complexity of those political relationships and ultimately the kind of financial and business relationships in a region when the governance is unwieldy and when the pay is substandard. You're maybe always going to get earlier career people, but unfortunately, earlier career people are often not as able to deal with some of those things. They don't have the experience. So I do think there's a lot to talk about there. I just think the conversations haven't happened yet.
Well, with an eye on the time here, why don't we jump to our last question here, and I'll expand it out a little bit. So each of you is given a magic wand. You get to choose whether you're a Harry Potter character or a Gandalf. Anything outside of that's a no, I'm sorry. But you get to choose. You can change anything about the existing library system and how it's functioning that you think would make a big improvement. Or if you want to talk about where you think the library system could go, what would you envision for that future state that you would wave your wand and make happen? And maybe for this one, we'll start with you, Malcolm.
Oh, goodness. Yes. And I've been thinking about this. I have to go back to the funding, the predictable, sustainable funding. And as much as, this is true of so many aspects of our municipal affairs, to have predictable, sustainable funding for the programs and the activities and so on. But I think, I do view libraries as critical infrastructure. And I think there's a role that we have within our municipality to support that through our taxation system. But I think there's also a very significant role for the province to establish sustainable, predictable funding for the library system that moves with the economy, very much like the revenue sharing program that SUMA so carefully and so effectively established and has maintained that relationship with the government for a number of years. I just think that's my magic wand. And part of that, of course, is that there be a component of that supports small communities throughout, which many of our members in SUMA are very small communities, villages and towns that have small libraries that in many cases are operating on the support of the region, of course, and the support of their local municipality to whatever extent they can, but also very dependent on volunteers and very dependent on fundraising in small communities. So to me, it's got to be about the financial affairs.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. Jason?
Yeah, well, if I had a magic wand and could wave away all the intermunicipal strife, I guess, and say that we've come across in our research, the frustrations that some of the regional systems are experiencing, that we found a number of them were looking at transitioning to a municipal system. And so clearly there is an issue there. And so with my magic wand, I would wave those away. We just spoke about some of the changes that could be done to improve that. And I do agree with Jeff that that conversation needs to happen. It can be small incremental change, I think, would make a big difference in some of those cases. And certainly, the governance structure, funding, those are the two big ones that would need to be addressed. And I think if If the system looked at it in small bites and attacked it just incrementally, I think there'd see a lot of improvement. And I think it would go a long way to alleviate some of the frustrations that the municipalities are experiencing.
Thank you. Jeff?
I'm going to have to agree with Malcolm. You know, certainly the funding and governance are significant challenges. I would say both of them lead to some disparity. I think the funding challenges ultimately that we've discussed already, and you know, some way to figure out. And I think mostly this is legislative, or as you say, there's a finance manual now for regions and their formula, but it is a bit of a legislative piece that would need to be dealt with. I also think governance in that simplicity and as Jason said, you know, in talking to one kind of counselor from a municipality, it's also, I understand some of that tension when you're a decent sized city, but you can't control your own destiny. So I think, well, let's figure out how you can. And so I would think governance and finance as a piece together, and that ultimately one of the nice things I would say about empowering legislation and the legislation that we have is that through agreement and conversation, there are things we can do that don't require legislative change. Mm-hmm. So I look forward to that.
Excellent. Well, I just want to thank all three of you for bringing your wisdom today and your experience to the podcast, and for a great conversation. Jeff, Jason, Malcolm, I really appreciate you being here, and hopefully we can all chat again soon.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this very much. Appreciate it.
Indeed.
This brings us to the end of another episode of MuniCast. Thank you for listening in. This was the final episode in Season 8, and we look forward to kicking off Season 9 this fall. Is your municipality a SUMA member? Did you know elected officials and staff have access to resources, meeting and webinar recordings, templates, and more through the member portal? Each member municipality has one shared login to the portal. Chat with your administrator or contact the SUMA office for more information.